Welcome back everybody, I'm Nick930, and today I want to share my thoughts on the recent announcement for the new Battlefield game, specifically the open class format, and present a case for why I feel it should return to a class restricted format instead, with demonstrations of various common scenarios where a traditional restricted weapon format benefits the gameplay experience, including a discussion on combat readability, perceived game depth, balancing concerns, and potential solutions that bear in mind cost and time ramifications of any significant core changes. So let's start with readability. Moment-to-moment situational readability is a key part of any video game, as players ideally are given visual and auditory information that allow them to adapt on the fly and achieve an objective while avoiding a penalty. In a multiplayer shooter, this is extremely key to the flow of combat. You need to know what you're up against if you're going to determine which weapon to use and how to approach the encounter. Being killed by another player without having an opportunity to react cheapens the experience and makes it feel like you were killed unfairly. This is where class and weapon identification comes in. In a traditional class-based shooter like Battlefield, you generally can adapt to any combat encounter once you realize what you're dealing with. If you round a corner in Battlefield 2 and an enemy tries to launch a rocket at you, for example, that should immediately telegraph to a player with understanding of the game's class configuration the following key information. The enemy has additional rockets to repeat that attack and can wire guide them, and the enemy is only equipped with close-range weapons like an SMG or auto shotgun. Knowing this, you can now effectively respond from mid to long range, as closing the distance to the enemy is likely more dangerous than trying to pick them off from afar. A similar scenario would be if a sniper engaged the player. If a sniper fires a shot and hits the player, they immediately understand the following. The sniper rifle is bolt action and has a brief period before it could fire again. The sniper only has that rifle and a pistol. And the sniper likely has a claymore set up nearby. Knowing all this, you can begin to look for paths in the environment to close the distance and engage the target, or at the very least, look for an exit out of view of the sniper to escape. Skip ahead to the current class configuration, and this readability is negated by the implementation of unlocked weapons. So let's try and repeat those same examples, using 2042 as a visual placeholder. Because the weapons are fully open, the fact that the enemy fired a rocket only tells us that they have a rocket launcher. We don't know what primary weapon they're using, and therefore it's unclear what choice we have for engagement range in order to be effective at countering them. The sniper scenario is even more problematic though. If a sniper fires at you in 2042, you don't know what class they're playing as. You don't know what gadgets they may have, like medkits, spawn beacons, rockets. Unless you can see that sniper and nearby gadgets that they have deployed, you cannot react to the attack with a rational response. Let's do one more example though. Here we have a player using the tank. In past Battlefield titles, a tanker needs to constantly be on the lookout for a very clear enemy silhouette depending on the game. Maybe you see the familiar model silhouette first to identify them. But you likely will also see their signature weapon like the scoped M4 or AK-74U, which contributes to your understanding of what you're up against. If you see either the character model or their weapon getting close to your own tank, you know to prioritize those enemies over other enemy classes as they have the chance to instantly kill you. But in 2042, you're limited to a single identifying element, the not so obvious silhouette of the specialist model itself. This won't be the most clear visual indicator in the midst of a chaotic moment. Once you start to mix in seasonal skins, that silhouette will become even less clear, making it difficult to identify those C4 wielding recons in the crowd. Now, if we had a combination of that silhouette piece and the signature weapon like bolt-action rifles, we have that additional identifying feature to help identify a key threat. There's countless other scenarios where being able to associate a weapon with a class can benefit readability of combat and influence decision making. And to be clear, this is not something newer players may even be able to do effectively regardless. But for players that continue to grow with the game and learn how it functions, these elements help to expand the depth of the experience and make mastering the game more rewarding as a result. Which segues into the next key point here, the perceived game depth. One of the issues with 2042, aside from things like specialist, technical compromises for the larger player counts, etc., was the sense that there was a lot less content in general. Of course, the number of weapons in general contributed to most of this, from 70-80 weapons in BF4, BF1, and BF5, to only about 22 in 2042 at launch. But even a game with far less weapons, Battlefield 2142, still felt as though it had more gameplay depth and complexity than 2042 did. This is because the smaller number of weapons in BF 2142 were limited to specific classes that all played completely different from one another. If you choose an assault in 2142, you're expected to be a frontline soldier, fighting through the trenches, healing and reviving your buddies, and popping smoke grenades. You became extremely familiar with each assault rifle in that class, as each one played slightly different from one another, and perfectly complemented the intention of the class. As support, you were laying down suppressive fire with powerful LMGs alongside your auto turret and laser shield, and were looking for good mid-range choke points to maximize your kill count, making it play very differently, and thereby giving LMGs more intrinsic value in that they were more effective defensive weapons thanks to their larger mag belts. They're clearly not as useful in aggressive gameplay like the assault class, so you would play differently, giving a very different gameplay experience with that class and weapon choice. As recon, you are being sneaky, using camo to flank enemies, setting up ambushes and taking out key targets. The locked weapons here play directly into that, either shooting long range or fighting close quarters with the Lambert carbine. And of course, Engineer was focused more on vehicles, repairing, destroying, placing mines, and killing infantry only when they were close enough for the SMG to be effective. Each class having signature weapons with very specific engagement styles helped to give the perception of increased depth in the game, despite its smaller choice of weapons in general. 2042, leaving all those weapons open, minimizes the value of those particular weapons on a class-by-class basis. Why bother using SMGs on larger maps when you can just use an assault rifle instead, while also still using the rocket launcher? This eliminates SMGs almost entirely from the weapons used in the larger maps, thereby making the game at large feel less expansive and less interesting. The obvious downside here is this idea that there's less player choice by restricting the weapons. Players can't choose to play the way they want, and skins that they may have purchased are now locked to individual classes along with the associated weapon. But by giving players more choice in this area, you remove the value of certain weapons in general, and the intended engagement distance of classes as a whole, thereby reducing the depth and complexity of that class configuration, and removing any value that those weapons had in the first place. Which leads into our final issue, the balancing of the classes themselves. The classes in Battlefield are notoriously hard to balance, with there being a clear skew towards the assault class and their point farming medic duties, leaving players on the field with little option to reclaim ammunition due to the smaller pool of support players. Though the more pressing concern is the weapon balancing among the classes in relation to their class function. One of the most problematic class configurations I've noticed in 2042 is the high potential for very powerful sniper campers. The new game appears to benefit that playstyle very much, and it's not something that should be encouraged in my opinion. Currently, a player can play as Engineer with a bolt-action sniper, picking off infantry from a distance, and then shooting not just anti-tank rockets, but also AA rockets. There's zero rock, paper, scissors here. They're the rock, the paper, and the scissors. Even limiting them to a single launcher, they still are far too powerful a player, assuming that they're decent at the game and know how these tools work. Arguably one of the most problematic configurations is a sniper support. Here, they can endlessly resupply their health and ammo. They have no reason to move at all. They can take a hit, heal up, run back to the ledge, and shoot some more. This is not only extremely frustrating for a casual player dealing with this camper, but also the antithesis of the game's squad play, team-oriented focus. A support camper does not need to coordinate with their squad members at all, and likely won't bother contributing to the objectives unless it's convenient for them. In past Battlefield games, the only way a player could replicate this support sniper scenario were if they had the help of two other players, one dropping health and the other dropping ammo, while the sniper fired away. This was a synergetic power move that encouraged other squads to respond, making for an interesting dynamic in a match. Even setting up this type of three-way synergetic combo was rewarding for a group of players, as you felt you fully understood the game's systems and were working together to maximize its potential. And this is only one example. There's countless other squad synergies that are compromised with this open weapon format, and why it's critical to lock weapons to maximize that squad-based experience. So, what are our solutions here? Well, the first and most obvious solution would be to lock all weapons to classes, with small exceptions like shotguns, carbines, and DMRs similar to Battlefield 4. This gives players agency over how each class feels without giving any one class too much of an advantage. You can alternatively take a Delta Force approach, where certain common assault rifles like the M16 and AK-47 are considered common enough to be available for all classes, but the more high-end hardware like, let's say, a G36, are limited to only assault, and when modded out, they're more effective in assault rifle than the more common weapons from before. Another potential solution is using the attachments as a way of influencing the use of signature weapons with classes. Maybe using an LMG as assault takes away the ability to use attachments like longer range scopes. Maybe it's more subtle, in that you can only use so many attachments if the weapon is equipped to the wrong class. This gives you the option to use weapons across all classes still, but offers a penalty for doing so with weapons outside the recommended classes, effectively balancing out the feature a little more. Another solution, technically already featured in 2042, is a custom setting via something like Portal. While a nice solution in a pinch, this is going to massively splinter the community. You'll have your die-hard Battlefield purists in there occupying maybe 2 or 3 servers, while the vast majority are stuck in the intended servers with open weapons, all forming opinions of the game based on that style of class balancing. A perfect example for why this may not work comes from Ubisoft's Splinter Cell Blacklist. In that game, the developers brought back the Spy vs. Mercenary multiplayer mode, but wanted to put a modern twist on it. Traditionally, the spies in that mode only had non-lethal weapons, or tasers, to stun the mercenaries, and were forced to sneak up and grab them to kill them, giving it a very asymmetrical feel. But with their main Blacklist mode, they gave the spies guns, and turned the game into a first-person versus third-person shooter game, where CQC and stealth were thrown out the window. Still unique, but not quite the same, and because this was listed as Blacklist mode, a bulk of new players populated this newer default mode instead of the optional Classic mode that was more or less ignored. That game suffered from a variety of other issues as well, including a lack of server browser. But the lesson here is that players will click on option A, realize they don't like it, and never come back to the game at all. Very few will choose option B, because they have the impression that the developers don't consider this classic mode to be the correct way to play anymore. I don't believe this option would be effective in maintaining a healthy community, and believe that this fails to address the bigger issue in regard to the game's core balance and experience. And what's more, it's already in 2042, and nobody uses it. So, in conclusion, class-restricted weapons should be seriously considered for the next Battlefield. We've already tried the open weapon format in 2042, and it just didn't work. 2042's departure from the traditional class system in favor of specialists was widely panned by veteran players, and changes associated with that change, including universal weapons, will suggest to returning players that, while some features may be back to normal, there's still some leftover design decisions from 2042 lingering throughout. The intent of the open weapon format is not lost on me. I see that DICE wants to give players more choice and freedom to use any weapon that they want. But this does massively compromise the nature of a class-oriented gameplay experience. As it stands, Battlefield 2042, and whatever this new Battlefield's called, don't actually have a class system. If anything, you're more selecting a signature gadget in the spawn menu. The class should consist of everything within that kit, from the character's appearance, their weapon choices, their gadgets, and their throwables. By doing so, players can have better situational awareness, and skilled players can respond accordingly. Squad play is enhanced by giving more value to squad members and clear weaknesses that require cooperation to overcome. And the value of the content being provided is enhanced, as there's this impression of more depth, both to your available features like guns at launch, and to the design of the gameplay as a whole, maximizing the potential of the series' signature rock, paper, scissors sandbox. But what do you guys think? Do you think Battlefield should return to the classic class-restricted weapons? Or do you prefer having this open weapon format? Let me know in the comments section below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content posted every week.